I'm delighted to be starting this new series of summer deep dives with Notts County because of the 72 clubs in the EFL, they're probably one of the ones that I'm most curious about from the outside because my own individual sort of perception of where the club's at seems to probably differ most with a significant portion of the fan base. And what I'm really excited about with this podcast is kind of getting closer to that truth or wherever that middle ground lies. And I think from my own point of view, I look at Notts County and think I can remember a period from the mid to late 2010s when they were going from seemed to have a bit of off-field chaos. They seemed to be going from one coach to another of completely different styles, and they didn't really have much of a strategy. And in the end, that culminated in non-league football. And I think where they're at now is a million miles from that. I'm excited by the trajectory they're going on. I think they've got really reliable owners, some of the best in the EFL, I believe, in the Reedtz brothers. I think that they're making progress every season, and I feel they've made strides in the previous campaign. At the same time, there have been some dissenting voices. I think some of that's valid. There was a drop off in the second half of last season, and I think when there's a club like Notts County, that does come with a certain level of expectancy. So where is the middle ground? Is some of the criticism of the club over the last 12 months or so valid, or is this a club that's making real strides and can expect to be among the promotion front runners next season? And who's the manager going to be, or the head coach, as it's probably going to be? Plenty to get stuck into then on this summer deep dive. Yes, welcome along to EFL Debate. This is a new series of summer deep dives. I'm speaking to a fan of each of the 72 EFL clubs over the course of the summer between mid-June and mid-July. So if you want more of that stuff, you can get subscribed to us on YouTube and on Spotify. That would be very much appreciated. So I'm delighted to be joined by my first guest of the series, which is Tom Williams of the Not to Talk About podcast and very popular figure in the EFL and non-league communities. Good morning, Tom. Thanks so much for joining us. What's your feeling on where Notts County are at as a football club right now?
Yeah, well, I actually want to thank you for having me on. Firstly, Gab, it's always a pleasure. And obviously, when you asked me, I didn't realise I was going to be first up. So obviously, pressure on to do a decent job. I actually thought you summarised it really well in the intro, and I thought that you touched on some really good points. In as much that, like, the fan base, and I'm included in that, were disappointed at the end of the season. Not just the playoff exit, but I think the playoff finish. And that is a really weird thing to say about a club obviously finishing in the playoffs in any league. And I think there was quite a few teams in League Two actually that felt like that. 3 of the 4 probably were pretty disappointed with their season finish. Obviously, Wimbledon ended up being really happy, but they were disappointed probably at the time. And I think that kind of is a little bit where this summer feels like a reset, and it's been quite good, really. The last 2 weeks, there's obviously there are itchy feet. People want to see a new manager, but I actually think that a little bit of time has given everyone a chance to reflect and probably put into perspective where we are as a club and what a positive position we actually are in. Like I say, I've been guilty of it as well, being a bit doom and gloom and not being happy. But when you, like you say, you compare and contrast it to how the club's been in the past, you can't be anything but positive. And I guess it gives a little bit of perspective and where we're at. Obviously, I do think we had the squad to finish top 3 in hindsight, but a top 6 finish is still a really good season. And if you'd offered us that at the start of last season, we would have taken it. So it's all about perspective, isn't it? And I think with the Reedtz brothers in charge, yes, of course, like anyone, mistakes are made, and some decisions aren't always 100% the best. But I think they get more right than they get wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I think we're in a really good place now. And I liken it to when Ian Birchnell left. I liked Ian Birchnell, but a lot of fans didn't like Ian Birchnell. And same with Stuart Maynard. Some fans still quite liked him, but a lot of fans didn't like him. And then the next appointment they got in was Luke Williams. And I'm not saying that we're going to get a Luke Williams type figure where he just seems to be perfect, but I think he was definitely aided by the timing of that, where you've got a fan base who've been split over a manager, and whoever's appointed next depending on who it is, of course. But
Sure.
I would say, 9 out of the 10 possible appointments, I think there'd be probably unification around the candidate. And I think that that'll be a really positive place for Notts going into next season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think two things can be true at the same time, Tom. I think on the one hand, I personally, and I might be in the minority here, I still feel Stuart Maynard could have been successful if he'd been given more support in terms of coaching staff, which he didn't have in the second half season, another summer to recruit, maybe a bit better luck or more in terms of sports science, in terms of staying clear of injuries and keeping key players fit and fresh for the whole campaign. With all those things in place, I do think there was a possibility that Stuart Maynard could have gone on and been successful. At the same time, I think it's also true that it's possible for Notts County to find that Luke Williams, if you like, somebody who can kick things on another level. And I suppose that takes me on to the recruitment search, because Tobias Solberg is the current 1-2 favourite, formerly Duggerfor's IF coach in Sweden. Now, I'm not expecting you to be an expert on Swedish football, Tom, but I suppose, because I'm not either, but I do quite like that the club is willing to look further afield and isn't just focusing on the domestic market if there's substance behind those links.
Yeah, I mean, those links, I think they came from X, from Twitter. I think someone has probably picked him out as being the type of appointment that the brothers would look at, and whether it is him or not, I think that remains to be seen. But
you've got to admire the hipster element to try and pick out Tobias Solberg as the next Notts County head coach.
Yeah, exactly. There's definitely some interesting, and the favourite has changed loads of times. There's definitely some interesting names and things like that. But I think you've hit the nail on the head again there in terms of who it will be. There is, I think Stuart Maynard was slightly different because he came from the domestic market, and it was still a little bit outside the box type approach, trying to find value where others don't, looking at a part-time side and trying to find value there. But obviously Ian Birchnell, whilst an English coach, was working abroad. And Luke Williams, again, of course, was a coach with a very good reputation, but not one that was working within the game at the time, and kind of, again, was a little bit left field, even though within the game, obviously, very well respected as a manager. Despite a very good start at Swindon, it kind of petered out and didn't end very well for him. So that is kind of, I guess, where we're at. I think it will be another appointment of a similar ilk. We've been linked with Liam Richardson, and obviously a lot of the fans want the likes of Des Buckingham, which I think is a little bit too ambitious, to be honest. I don't think he would drop to League Two, but obviously it'd be great if he did. I would obviously love that, but I think it's probably maybe, considering he's been linked to the Cardiff job, I think it's probably a little bit step too far. Okay. But I don't think it'd be an appointment like that. I don't think it'll be an EFL proven manager. Obviously, there have been, again, one of the people in the odds for a lot of the times was João Alves, who's obviously an internal appointment.
Well, do you know what, Tom? Just on that, I looked on the Wikipedia page, and for some reason, João Alves is listed as an assistant on the Wikipedia page for Notts County. So I don't know who's behind that or what that means, but I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, I mean, he's had a really interesting rise from being an analyst. I think he has been assistant under Stuart Maynard at the latter portion, because obviously Stuart's assistants left.
Oh, I see. Right, okay. Yeah. Right, okay, I get you.
Yes, he stepped into that role. So I guess it will be a remarkable rise if he was to get the job. But I think, I've got no idea who it will be, but I think that it has been a few weeks. I think that is encouraging. I know a lot of fans are, understandably, they want an appointment and get the summer kicked off, and they want someone to get behind. But I think it shows they're probably doing their due diligence. They're not rushing a decision. It'll be measured. It'll be considered. And yeah, I can't get away from the idea that it will be a Luke Williams type appointment, where it'll be probably a coach rather than a proven manager. I know a lot of fans want a proven EFL manager, but with that comes baggage, of course. So I think that's where the owners try and strike a balance, and what they have given the head coaches so far, by and large, definitely from an attacking perspective, they've given a lot of tools for these coaches to work with. And I think that's where they'll look next, is a coach who they feel will get the best out of a group. And you've seen that with, I'm sure you're going to talk about it, with Matthew Dennis signing without a manager being in place.
Sure.
It's not really a manager at Notts County, it's a head coach, really. They're not that involved in all the elements of running the football club. So that does lend itself to appointing someone that is perhaps a on-the-grass coach rather than a traditional experienced manager.
That does make a lot of sense. One thing I'm slightly apprehensive about, I guess, though, Tom, is from what I can see, Richard Montague left for Swansea in January, was it? And he hasn't been replaced so far. I'm sort of slightly, in terms of recruitment this summer, you've not got a sporting director in place. The head coach that you had last season has gone. Is there a danger that, because by the time some people come into those positions, it's almost too late to have the sort of their own lists drawn up, if you like? So from a preparation point, is there any apprehension from your point of view around that?
Yeah, I get what you're saying in terms of certainly for a manager, I guess, or a head coach rather, coming in, working with a group that he's perhaps not worked with, and he'll have his own opinions on who he'd want to play and who he'd not want to play, etc. Those sort of things. But I think it's the way that the club kind of operates in terms of they have their own model, which they've had at their own company, and then obviously tried to, I guess, tweaked it for Notts and used it in a more professional football setting. And I think they trust in that model. And don't get it wrong, I think the model's got some things wrong. I think it's certainly its profiling of attacking players is stronger than it is of defensive players. Although this season we've got that right. And I think that's the big thing, is that whoever comes in has got, as long as the squad stays the same, has got a lot of key tools to work with. I think in terms of the spine of the team is really strong. I think you've got 5 or 6 players that would probably get into most teams in the league. I'm probably trying to be conservative there. I think there's probably at least 5 or 6 that you would say most sides would be very happy with in their starting 11. And unlike teams of the past, of Notts, recent teams, they're not necessarily just the front 4 or 5, where in the past you might have gone, oh yeah, we'd take the front 5, but we'd have to have a whole new defence. We've already got those pieces in place. So I think that what you said about Stuart Maynard as well could have been a success. I mean, what he has overseen is, I guess, a period of transition where we've gone from being an all-out attack team to now we're probably in a position where we're actually probably slightly more, I wouldn't say defensively minded, because we still have the ball and dominate, but we're less risk-taking. So now we need to, I guess, strike the balance between the two extremes, where probably there's been too much focus on being really solid. We've probably lost a little bit of that spark. So I think...
I mean, you say that, Tom. I mean, I definitely think second half of the season, there were certainly games where that was the case. But you were still one of the most creative sides statistically last season. So I agree with you. I think there have been shifts towards becoming more solid, and it's constantly a balancing, a sort of... what's the kind of getting close to that kind of middle ground, if you like. But I do think that you are closer to that balance than maybe you were the year before, when you were brilliant going forward and hopeless at the back. I think this season just gone, you've been pretty good going forward and very strong at the back.
Yeah, no, definitely. And just to also touch on one of your previous points, we haven't got, I guess, a direct replacement for Montague. But we have got Roberto Gagliardi. I think it was at Leyton Orient. I think it was before he's kind of come in as, I think, head of football, that sort of role.
So okay.
There are people, and obviously the Reedtz brothers as well. So they're perhaps not like the light replacement, but with him and Joe Palmer obviously doing the more business side, and I think that is the other thing to touch on, though, as Notts as a club, is that there is I don't want to say concern within the fan base, but I guess as a club, we're trying to operate on 2 fronts in terms of as a football club, but also as a business and a self-sustainable model. And with the things like the Nest, which obviously has been brilliant for the club, and another revenue stream. But we kind of, I guess, not split attention in terms of course, we still want success on the pitch, but I guess some fans will probably want all attention to be poured into on the pitch operations, if that makes sense, rather than a self-sustainable model where there's perhaps concern that we haven't reinvested some of the money for players we've sold, things like that, where it's going on infrastructure. But I guess that's a long-term project for a club, isn't it, to try and operate slightly differently than other clubs, and obviously differently to how Notts have operated in the past as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think Gagliardi is a good point about Gagliardi coming in. I think for some reason I looked on the club website and they didn't have him listed there, so kind of slipped through the nest for me. I want to have a look at the squad. You've got Alex Bass in goal. One of the best goalkeepers in League Two for you?
Yeah, definitely one of the best, if not the best. Now that I guess last season you probably have him up there with Owen Goodman, but obviously he won't be in League Two next season. So I would probably say he's the best keeper in the league. Maybe Matt Macy at Colchester is obviously very good as well. But yeah, if not the best, then one of. And it's been a real problem position, I guess, for Notts, where again in terms of fan base confidence, it has been pretty low until Alex Bass, who's everyone's been behind him, and he's rewarded that faith. But yeah, obviously a backup as such is needed, but it's a real problem position to
It's
recruit.
a hard one to recruit for, isn't it?
100%, exactly. And I do worry that in the past, perhaps we haven't given that position the due attention it needs. It's very difficult because you are looking at Alex Bass and you would expect him to play 46 games. But he did get injured last season, and thankfully it wasn't a long-term injury, but it then meant Sam Slocum had to step in, and Sam's been a great servant to the club, but he's probably been a little bit overdue having an upgrade in that kind of department. So yeah, I think that will be one of the positions we actually will need to recruit in, despite the fact that we probably have got an undisputed starter, but yeah, it's a very difficult role to recruit for.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the big priority. But it's great. I think if Bass stays fit for the whole season, then that would be a great plus for you in terms of challenging right at the top. In terms of the outfield squad, it's obviously a little bit difficult to map the squad out without knowing what the formation is going to be next season. So I've gone off last season's formation, which was normally a 3-4-2-1 or something close to that. I mean, yeah, I don't know whether Tobias Solberg, if it is him, is likely to want to go to a back four. Do you think that changing from a back three from time to time and having a bit more flexibility could be a help for you next season?
Definitely. I know there were sort of calls towards the playoff campaign to go to that. I just think that to coach a new system, you need a pre-season really to really get those patterns and that structure right. I think changing it mid-season is difficult. It'd be great to have the flexibility to play both. I think we need to recruit a different profile of player in a few areas because we haven't got a natural left back or right back really. You could put Jacob Badeau at left back or Lewis Macari at right back, but neither of which really are what a traditional
You
fullback.
would call them fullbacks, would you?
No, exactly. So that would be the issue with that, would be that we'd have to probably add a few more bodies to a squad, which I think is already a little bit bloated, to be honest, in terms of the amount of bodies we've got, especially in midfield, where I expect us to either trim down or I do expect us to probably perhaps move a couple on. But I think it'd be good to have a bit more flexibility in terms of shape, because we have played that shape and system for a long time now, and that of course that has been the recognised possession-based system and shape for a few years. But football moves on, and there have been a lot more back fours, especially at the top level. A lot of back fours, especially defending in a four, have been a lot more popular. So yeah, I would expect whoever the head coach is to play a system that suits obviously what they believe. But yeah, it'd be nice to see us use a four. But we've tried it before. Luke Williams even tried it, and it didn't really pay off. So it's difficult. I think it would need a full pre-season and fully committing to it to transition to a new shape.
That's the thing, because if we look at an area like right wing back, do you recruit? I think you'll sign a right wing back one way or another. But what I'd say is, do you recruit a super attacking right wing back who can provide all the width and be that guy that really gets you moving in the final third? Or do you sign a right wing back who can bomb up and down, but could also be a right back in a four? Because the latter option would give you more flexibility, but the former option would maximise the 3-4-2-1, especially if you want the two number 10s to play close to one another, would probably maximise that better. So again, that's going to be a key factor in determining how you recruit.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I agree. I think that will be another position that we do add in is right wing back. I guess at the minute, the wing backs you would say are obviously Jody Jones, Will Jarvis, who neither of which are really they really put the wing in wing back, both of those.
Yeah.
And then you've got Cerula and Gordon. So I think you have. I mean, depending on if Gordon stays, I'd imagine that he probably will.
Yeah, I mean, I've only got Gordon on the right. I've got Jones, Cerula, and possibly Jarvis as left wing back. Although there's an argument that Jarvis is maybe better suited to a different role, but Gordon seems to be the only. I mean, I know Maynard did play Cerula on the right, but I think conventionally, I think Gordon's the only natural right wing back.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. And Jody played on there as well. And I know that there is a lot of debate within the fan base whether those inverted wing backs work. But either way, I think we need to add another option in there. And whether that's a more natural right wing back probably would be good for the flexibility of the side. But like you say, we haven't, looking at an Aaron Domain who we had obviously before, who's doing okay now, doing quite well, and would be at that ilk of signing and that kind of profile of player would give us a different option. So it is an interesting role, and I think who we sign in that position will tell us a lot about what we make of the current options. And I mean, I personally think it will be Jones and Jarvis as the wing backs.
Really, you don't think you'll recruit a first choice wing back?
I think with those two, you've got two unbelievable footballers where 1v1, and I think that's the crucial thing about playing Jarvis as a wing back is that, yes, I agree, he's played as a centre forward and he's got some attributes there, but I think his best attribute is one-on-one against a defender, standing start, and I think you get that as a wing back a lot more than you get in the centre of the pitch because you're closed down a lot more in the centre of the pitch. When you're a wing back, you've got a touchline protecting you from one angle, so you've only got to worry about the players in front of you. So I think he'll probably be playing in that left wing back role. But for me, yeah, Will Jarvis is probably one of the key players this season. I think he's a player that we really need to almost build around because he's our player, he's permanent, and he has shown flashes of brilliance. And I think that he's a player that could really develop and it could be a really, really big player for us.
So if we work from the idea of having Jody Jones as a right wing back, presumably that's what you meant with Jarvis on the left, then I think you would need some kind of width to be created, either through an overlapping centre half, through the right-sided midfielder kind of overloading the flank. You would need maybe if you play two up top, the right-sided striker pulling wide, or the right 10, if you like, also sort of overloading those areas. So you need one or two of those things to counterbalance Jody Jones cutting inside. Because if Jody Jones is cutting inside and you've got no other width, he's basically running into traffic. And as much as I love Jody Jones, I don't think that's going to be very effective from a team point of view, even if Jones might be able to come up with some moments of magic. So I guess let's start from the right centre-back position. If we work from the assumption of who's going to complement Jones, I think the first thing is they've got to be super athletic because on the one hand, they might be needed to make those overlapping runs. But on the other hand, because Jody Jones, you don't want to be relying on him too much defensively. They've got to be solid and strong and aggressive in those 1v1. So that for me looks like that's going to shape how you recruit for that right centre-back role.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the big role this season is because obviously, like we spoke about before, the season before last, the back three came with a lot of scrutiny, and we went out and added two massive players, obviously Vidal and Platt, who have been fantastic.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Who would have thought it?
Yeah, well, exactly. You called Beto, and it was a great shout, and that is the type of profile I guess we need on the right. With Lewis McCarr is still a young player, and I feel he's been probably the biggest victim of those two arriving because he was the season before he was the one player that fans wanted to keep in that position, and now we've got a season on. He's probably the one player that fans are looking in that back three to replace. Obviously, we've already got Lucas Ness as well. My biggest reluctance with Lucas Ness is obviously his availability. It hasn't been particularly available for Notts, and he hasn't been particularly available. Obviously, previous club as well. We signed him when he was injured, so I think the right centre back. Yeah, you're right. It has to be a big signing, and that of course is assuming that we stay with with the back three,
Of
because
course, yeah.
obviously I know that I'm seeing some of the comments saying about wing backs. I guess Jones and Jarvis being wasted there, and I think that there is an argument that with players of their ability, their calibre, that a system that employed them as wingers would probably possibly be getting the better out of them, and getting them further at the pitch where they've got less defensive responsibility. But then again, that does require we definitely need an out and out right back, if nothing else. And maybe you go Platt and Bedo as your centre backs, and maybe Cerula could play as an out and out left back. I don't know. He's quite attacking for me for that role, but maybe you want that. But I think it definitely is merit to say that use them as wingers would be preferable. But if we do stick with a back three, I think right centre back is the position where 2/3 of the back three is nailed on. You're not going to get those Bedo and Platt on going to be dropped out of the team. So there's kind of one centre back position to play for. So yeah, definitely a position I think we would probably recruit in. But maybe just to wrap up on that point, it's another difficult position to recruit for because athletic centre backs aren't in abundance at this level. So maybe it's a loan option, simply by virtue of the fact that we already have 5 centre backs.
Yeah,
it might be a bit much to add a 6th.
that makes a lot of sense. And also, I think Premier League loans, you're likelier to get the level of talent that you need, players who could make a difference. Whereas you've probably got the experience of players who know how to compete in League Two and have got that sort of more streetwise side in Bedo and Platt. So I think a Premier League loan could make sense for sure. Okay, well, I mean, again, it's difficult, isn't it, not knowing quite what the formation is going to be and how they're going to go about it. So there's a little bit of guesswork here, but we'll work through it. I guess in terms of the middle centre back role, for me, I think Rod McDonald should only be a middle centre back option because, in terms of depth, because I think it looks very awkward for him when he's in one of those wide centre back spots. I think previously, actually, when I've spoken to fans of other clubs that he's played for, they've said he's very strong in the air and good at defending his penalty area. And he's come off the back of great seasons with Harrogate and Crewe Alexandra. But I don't know that he's got the ball playing qualities or the mobility and the pace in wide areas to do it as a wide centre half. So for me, Ron McDonald's the backup to Matty Platt in that middle centre back spot.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that 100%. He's got qualities, obviously, in terms of his aerial dominance that some of the other options don't have. Some of the other, I guess, rotational backup options or squad options, however you want to phrase it, don't have. But yeah, he obviously, like you say, isn't perhaps a natural fit in terms of the wide centre back role, and obviously pace as well. At times, is probably caught him out a little bit in that role. I guess because he's left-footed, he might get shoehorned into being the backup for the left side just because he's left-footed. But I think, realistically, he has to be the backup middle. And I think as a backup middle centre back, it's fine. Like he's a League Two experienced defender, and again, being the squad option, you can't have 20 first-team players because you're going to have discontent within the squad very, very quickly. So I think as a squad option, he's fine. But we can't be in a position again next season where he's starting at right centre back for an extended period. I think that it wasn't his fault, but it's not his role. And whilst he tried his best in that position, you could kind of see the difference in levels between them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first choice is definitely going to be Matty Platt, whether it's as right centre back in a 4 or middle centre back in a 3. He's made a real difference to that rear guard, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's been huge. Matty Platt has been absolutely massive. I know that obviously there was a lot of shouts of Bedo being played this season. I think Matty Platt was probably mine. I think he was brilliant. He's like you said, would be good on the ball in terms of. For Barrow, when he was at Barrow, he was obviously good on the ball, and he translated that to Notts, that play style. He's aerially dominant. He's a leader as well, and I think that in terms of recent business, he's another one that's been absolutely spot on in the heart of that defence. And I think that a lot, maybe not enough praise is given because that was a brilliant signing.
Yeah, I think he's made a huge difference. I don't know if I was expecting him to make as big an impact as he has, but he's been top draw. And then Jacob Badeau again, he just addressed a very clear limitation in that position from Notts County last season. I think you can see a lot of goals down his side of the pitch the year before, and this season that's been a lot tighter. So yeah, again, Jacob Badeau looks like a fantastic addition, doesn't he?
100%, and I'm quite grateful that I think we've got him on another 2 years. So I don't want to obviously start any rumours or anything like that, but he's the type of player that I feel like teams higher up the pyramid would or should be looking at, because he's so excellent in his position. He's a great age, and again, on a free transfer, he's superb business. And yeah, he's got all the attributes in that position. He is a nightmare player to play against. I don't think anyone would fancy playing against him for full 90, and that is a massive bonus to have, isn't it? You don't often say that about defenders. So I think that, yeah, he's been a fantastic addition, and definitely, again, similar to Platt, really, where the impact's probably expected a big impact, but perhaps not quite as big as they have made.
I guess the question would be, do you sign I think if you play with a back four, Rob McDonald would be the backup left centre half. I think if you play with a back three, there's one option where you could look at bringing in somebody who could play a left back in a four, but could also cover Jacob Badeau as a left centre half. Somebody who's quite solid, almost like maybe an Adam Chickson kind of, but a bit younger kind of profile.
Yeah, I think that's certainly an option. Certainly an option, like you say. I think it'd have to be someone that primary position would be a left back, I guess, but just because if we sign a left centre back and a right centre back, you've got 7 centre backs, and you started to get a little bit bloated. But like you say, given that squad flexibility, I think you're right. Someone that can play left back. Obviously, not every left back can play left back in a left centre back in a back three, but a lot of them can. Someone that's perhaps a more traditional fullback. So again, I think that will come down to who the manager is. If the head coach comes in and says, I want to play a back five and I'm not interested in the back four at all, then I don't think. But if they do want to play a back four, which again could possibly get the best out of some of the attacking options that we've got, then yeah, that kind of profile, I do agree. Like an Adam Chickson, maybe a bit younger, but yeah, someone in that position could be a good addition as well. To be fair,
for sure. I mean, I suppose the interesting thing, just going back to formation, because that is quite a dominant theme here, I guess. Even if the coach that comes in does typically like to play a back four, do you think that from a continuity point of view, it would be better to stick with the back three? Or do you think that there could be some benefit for somebody going 4-2-3-1 and, say, putting Jody Jones into a higher position, or putting Will Jarvis higher at the pitch and freshening things up that way?
Yeah, I think that would be it's a really good point. I haven't thought about that, but like a really good way to distinguish themselves from previous managers and really bring in a kind of fresh, new era, I suppose. And I think there is an argument for that we have become a little bit stale. And in terms of the play style is great, and I'm a big fan of the play style, but it has been the same with different variations. And Luke Williams a little bit more purposeful, a little bit more front foot, maybe less emphasis on structure, whereas it's been a bit more structure based under Maynard. But like I kind of said before, football has moved on a little bit, and I'm not saying that we have to change the way which we play, but in terms of keeping the ball and looking after the ball, I think that they're great things to have as an identity. But I don't think that's limits the structure or the shape that you use. So certainly, it'd be interesting to see a manager go for a back four in a 4-2-3-1 sort of shape, or a 4-3-3, where you get those wingers higher up the pitch. And maybe that's the way we go, because obviously in terms of the forward options, we still have Alassane Jatta as we're speaking, but I imagine there will be interest, and there has been obviously rumoured interest over the last 6 months. Obviously we have lost David McGoldrick, and obviously we've already signed Matthew Dennis, but if you're wanting to play a wing-back system, you either need 2 10s or 2 strikers, and maybe a 4-3-3 type system allows you to get the best out of what attack, rather than having to go and recruit a centre forward, another one on top of Dennis. We've already got Jody Jones and Will Jarvis, who I think are excellent attackers for the level. So maybe you get out of them rather than trying to get players to shoehorn into a certain structure and certain shape.
Yeah, because we can maybe jump to the centre forward position then, because I think if we look at Alassane Jatta, if we look at his strengths, very athletic, absolute monster in the press. You'd be very scared to face him. I think from crosses into the box, there seems to be a lot of crosses and cutbacks that he seems to finish from, if you like. But I also feel sometimes that because he doesn't have that agility, you know how some front threes where there's a real synergy and there's a real movement between them. I don't think you really have that with Jatta. So one thing I would be interested in is if you cash in on him, but then Matthew Dennis, I think he might be a slightly different profile, whether it actually could work differently where you bring in players that could rotate and interchange in a different way as opposed to Jatta being the main man, if you like.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think with my Traore as well, who I mean, I didn't forget about him, but he's not had like a massive impact over the last 6 months as perhaps we expected from someone that you pay a big fee for, but hasn't had the chances. Like that's important to sort of to note as well, that he perhaps hasn't had the game time that is needed to make an impact. But he, from the flashes and the bits we have seen of him, a little bit better in the link-up play. So again, perhaps that fluidity a little bit more than a Jatta, for example, who I think you're right in terms of agility. He just, I mean, all due respect, he's sometimes a little bit clunky on the ball, I guess, and that comes with his power. But he's not perhaps got the most refined. He's not the most refined or most finesse for a forward. So yeah, if we were to play a system where you're trying to get a Jarvis and a Jones involved and it's more about link-up play and a bit more fluidity, then yeah, I think Traore may be a better fit in that position. So with Dennis already coming in, I don't know if we would target another centre forward, especially if Jatta stays. I don't think we would target another centre forward at all because there's already 3 in the building.
Sure.
And I know that a lot of Notts fans will say, well, we haven't replaced Didsey, but I don't think you can replace McGoldrick. I just don't think there's a player of that level. Yeah, exactly. I just don't think there's a player that replaces McGoldrick. So I think that you kind of want to hide into nothing trying to find a replacement because there isn't one. So I think that's kind of, you have to overlook that a little bit. As sad as that is, I just don't think there's a player of that calibre that would come to League Two.
Yeah. I mean, do you think the club will cash in on Jatta this summer then? Do you think for 700 grand, 800, something like that?
I think if we got that, I think we would. I think obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing, and obviously bearing in mind his performance in the second half of the season, there would be an argument to say we should have cashed in January. But if you go back to that point in time, that would be a team competing for top 3, selling their top scorer, which would be an ambitious move, having already lost Dan Crowley in that window as well. So I think that it was the right decision at the time, even though hindsight probably told you we should have cashed in, and maybe his price tag is a little bit lower now because he hasn't scored the goals in the second half of the season because of the way the playoffs ended for him. And
also summer markets, the price sort of drops down a bit naturally anyway, doesn't it, from January markets where the prices are crazy.
Exactly. I think the one bonus we do have is that for League One as well, I'd imagine he would go, top end League One. And I don't think the market is brilliant for strikers in terms of, I think those teams are going to have to pay for a striker anyway. So I don't think there's loads of free agent strikers in those positions this summer. So we're lucky in that sense if we wanted to get a little bit of money for him. It's a difficult one because you don't ever want to say, we want to sell a player who's scored that many goals. And last season, 4 players got double figures for goal contributions, and that was McGoldrick, Jatta, Crowley, and George Abbott. Of course, 3 of those have already gone. Abbott's gone back on loan. Crowley had double figures before January, and McGoldrick's gone. So if you lost Jatta as well, you then go into the new season with none of your 4 top goal contributors. So it's a completely fresh start and reset. But in some ways, I think that he's probably, of the 4, would be the one that you would want to cash in on. So obviously George Abbott was out of our hands, not our player, but Yeah, it's a difficult one in terms of would I want to keep him or not.
Mm.
But I think if you've got a good offer for him, the way the club operates and the model that we have, I think we'd have to take a good offer for him, because I think, as much as I do like Jata, he's replaceable in that
Mm.
role. Probably more so than, say, Langstaff, who we lost 12 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think with Langstaff, he did have a little bit that ability to just drop in sometimes and link up play and get involved with that side of the game. I wanted to ask you about Matthew Dennis, because I know you do cover a little bit of non-league. Have you been able to do some digging on him after he signed for the Magpies?
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited by him as a signing. I think it's the exact right type of profile that Notts should go for. And I guess a little bit, like we mentioned at the start of the show, in terms of the perspective of where we're at. And I spoke about how we've kind of lost sight a little bit of, actually, last season was quite a good season, all things considered. It's kind of a similar thing where I feel like we've kind of lost sight of what we do best as a club in terms of recruitment, and that is signing these types of players. Obviously, 23, free transfer, like with an asterisk of small amount of compensation, I imagine, because he's 23 and under and have been offered a new contract. But it'll be a small amount because he wasn't a Carlisle youth player or anything like that, so it won't be loads. And he's got a good goals to minutes ratio as well, which, and I like what I've seen of him. He's got a little bit of pace that perhaps we haven't had. He's worked under possession-based coaches, your Mike Williamsons, Jimmy McNulty's, who will have done that detail with him to get in the right positions,
Yeah.
staying in between the posts. He does that quite well. So I think that will be really useful, and he'll fit into the style, I think, a lot better than some forwards would. So that period of adjusting will be hopefully a lot easier. I think the caveat you have to have is the availability question mark, which a lot of our signings increasingly tend to have against them. I think that's where we, as a club, probably feel we find the value, that we can take players that have got a small sample size but have got a good sample size, good within the small sample.
Yeah.
But there is obviously an inherent element of risk there that.
Yeah, you do rely on getting the sports science side right, and if and it sometimes you sort of open yourselves up to that risk. I tend to think you want to have one or two of those risks, if you like, in the squad, but you also want a really large group of players who are very reliable, so that you know what you're getting over the course of the season. Because I think if you have too many injury risks, then you do come a cropper. So.
Yeah, and I think that is probably the one question mark is that we haven't just got one or two. There's probably 4 or 5 at least, and obviously one of them was Junior Moraes, who's now gone on a mutual termination, and I wish him all the best. But yeah, there is that element of risk to him. But I think overall, though, he is a very exciting signing in terms of, I think that he could be one that we can get the best out of. And again, not to sound like we want to be a selling club, but I think he's also one of those players that's got the potential, because he's on a 3-year deal. I think he's got the potential to be sold on as well in 12, 18 months' time.
I think you're getting him at the right age, because I think he got a move. He'd done well at the start of his career, and then he got a move to MK Dons. I think around 2022, something like that. And it might have been a bit too soon for him to go for that kind of step, but maybe this time around he's got a bit more experience under his belt in non-league and in the National League, and so that could help him. I want to circle back to midfield then, Tom, because at the moment you've got 4 senior midfielders in Matty Palmer, Jack Hinchy, Scott Robertson and Curtis Edwards, with Riley Reynolds, Riley Reynolds, make sure I get the name right, off the back of a positive loan at Kidderminster Harriers. Do you think you'll recruit another midfielder, or do you think you're done in that area of the pitch?
This is the biggest problem area for me, because I think you could probably put Conor Grant in there. I know he's more of a 10, but you could probably get him in that conversation as well. So like you say, we've got 5, 6, if you include Reynolds, who had a positive loan. I imagine he'll go out on loan again to the National League, but it's definitely exciting to see a young player from our youth side kind of getting those senior minutes, and it'd be nice to see someone come through and break into the team, which hasn't, the ones that have been, like Lucien Mahova, for example, who's gone on and played championship minutes, we let him go.
Norwich,
yeah, exactly. We let him go, so and it'd be difficult for him to play with Bedeau being in the team and things like that. But it'd be nice to see a young academy product break through. So excited about him. But this is the area of the pitch where I think, when I mentioned we've got a bloated squad, I think this is the area where I look at that and there's been a discontent around Matty Palmer. I don't share in that discontent. I actually think he was a victim of a team where towards the back end of the season, well, firstly he had George Abbott next to him, which I think made his performances not look as strong because George Abbott was just so good. So I think he suffered in the sense that he's playing against someone alongside someone who's a star.
Or his own performances, Tom, before his injury meant that the expectation of where Matty Palmer's sort of level was at really high standards.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. And he had a big injury. And players don't always come back the same from those injuries. So I still think he's a starter for me. I think at this level you won't get many better than him. I think with a new coach, a new system, he needs options ahead of him as well. A lot of people say, "Oh, you didn't play forward enough," but if you haven't got the options ahead of you, the movement ahead of you, other than the goal trick, there was a little bit of lack of movement at times. Players not getting into space. It's hard.
I wonder because I felt like as much as there wasn't much in the way of combination play or movement in those advanced areas, was there? So I guess that makes it harder. So is there a possibility that Curtis Edwards, if he can find full fitness, could find another gear? Matty Palmer, full pre-season, that's going to benefit him. Jack Hinchy's a young talent, another year on. Scott Robertson in the mix as well. So is there a possibility that some of these players could become better with different movement ahead of them?
Definitely. I think Scott Robertson's the one you look at there, and we missed a little bit of some of his qualities last season in terms of he's got that little bit of aggression in midfield that perhaps we lacked at times. But that is my sort of worry, is that obviously Robertson, again, another one, availability, injury. He had a season sort of played with injuries. But you've got him, Edwards, like you say, Hinchy and Grant, and I think that they're all fine players, but they're obviously, firstly, none of them are George Abbott, which is difficult. Again, another player that I think is going to be very difficult, well, basically impossible to replace.
Yeah.
But I do just look at that midfield department and think that is basically the reason why Sam Austin, I think, was released, because he was another body in that role where, had others been out of contract this summer, maybe they would have gone instead of him. But if you keep Sam Austin, you then really are locked in at centre midfield. I think we've probably got space for one more. I think we probably will sign in that role. Maybe another loan player. Maybe it might be a loan. But I do think we need someone with that a little bit of X factor, especially, again, I know I'm lumping Grant in there because in terms of like having 10s, we haven't got any real 10s.
Yeah, oh my God, yeah. It looks very dry, that 10 position, those 10 positions, don't they? I mean, I've got Connor Grant, who you mentioned there, Cisse as well, you'd probably class as a 10, and I think it's James Anderson, isn't it, from the academy? But other than that, I mean, yeah, you're definitely going to need a couple coming in those positions. Yeah,
exactly. So I think it all depends how and where you profile the players, because I mean, there's obviously the school of thought where if you go with the 2 10s again this season, Curtis Edwards could play one of those 10 roles, and then you've got the space to assign another centre midfielder. But again, it's that kind of, do these options really inspire you in terms of, you look across the squad, and we spoke about the centre backs, how great they've been. We spoke about Jarvis and Jones, how exciting they could be. Centre forwards, again, also exciting area. I think centre midfield is an area where we've probably got the most players across the 8 and the 10 role, I guess. But none of them really grab you and you go, wow, what an amazing option. Or, every team in this league would love to have them. I'm not sure you say that about a lot of those players. I think Connor Grant would be
actually on that, while we pick up on that theme, I would say there's probably 4 players in the squad right now that I think that's probably true of.
Yep.
I think that maybe 5 if you include Jatta for now, although I think the club might cash in on him. But yeah, I think be 4 or 5 players from last season that you would say, yes, they really move the needle. So I think the recruitment in terms of the other half of the other few in the best 11, I think is going to be crucial.
Exactly, and that is a great phrase, move the needle, in terms of. That's why I think we're a little bit bloated. But I think that you've probably got 4 or 5 central midfielders there who, if you had 2 of those in the squad, you'd say, yeah, they're good squad options. That's the kind of depth you need at this level. But you don't need 5 of them, or 4 of them, or however you want to profile them. So that is my biggest concern. I am in the minority where I think Conor Grant does do things off the ball and his positioning. I mean, for example, in the playoffs, the chances he got were from his timing of run, his positioning. He got in the right positions. Now, he didn't finish those chances, and that's where the limitations and drawbacks of his game are. And, you know, for example, Dan Crowley would have taken those chances. But again, that's Dan Crowley, a different level of player. But we probably need one of those, that level where I know I've said a lot about, we can't replace Didsey, we can't replace X, Y, and Z, but we need to find a player in that, whether it be a 10 or a really, really good 8. And if you compare the squad to this time, I guess 12 months ago, you've lost Abbott and Crowley from that position, two very, very good players in that role, and you probably need someone in to help bridge that gap. And maybe it'll just be one because we've got so many bodies in there, but I do think we need someone because at the moment, like I say, the options, they're fine, but if we want to push on from we want to make progress from 6th position, we have to have a stronger squad than we did last season. And I think in that area of the pitch, I would say that's where we're weaker, despite having a lot of bodies in there.
Could we just touch on the likes of Jack Hinchy and Curtis Edwards? I'm curious about because I think, would you describe him as an 8? Because he's a difficult player to pin down sometimes, isn't he, Curtis Edwards?
He really is difficult to pin down because he's not quite an 8 because or a 10 because I'm not, again, technically on the ball. He in those tight spaces, I'm not 100% convinced. But then he's got some good physical qualities, especially against the ball. But then if you have him and Conor Grant in the team, I think they probably both, whilst they're different players, they offer, you could probably afford to have one of them in the team where it's kind of a player that makes the team tick and they're not a standout. But if you have two of them in the team, you're then losing that little bit of creativity. And maybe that's where a switch to a more attacking shape, which allows Jones and Jarvis and maybe another winger, say, to get forward and have that, give the mantle to those forward players to be a bit more creative, and then the argument to have a more solid midfield 3, say, behind them. But yes, similar with Jack Hinchy. I think, again, he's a fine player, but not spectacular. And that's kind of, I guess, the similar profile with a Hinchy, with an Edwards. They're good at certain elements, but they're certainly not a complete package, as you're going to struggle to find at League 2 level. But it's those little bits of someone who can take a risk and create something. I'm not necessarily sure that's the type of player that they are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, I think a lot of unknowns at the moment in lots of different areas. So we'll wait and see. One of my strategies, I'm coming up in late July. I'm doing my 1-24 season previews, and obviously that's a way off. But one of my processes for that is I've got a spreadsheet where I've got 14 main sort of variables, if you like, that I think are going to determine each team's chance, and I've got kind of waiting for that. Weight each variable and come up with a score for each team that kind of helps with my predictions. So some quick fire questions across each of the different categories. Some of them we won't know right now, but I'm going to throw these at you and give me a number between 1 and 10 to sort of determine where you're at. Ownership.
I'll give it a 9. I think, I know you said quick fire, but I'll give it a 9 because I know there's been a bit of discontent, but I think overall you won't get much better.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Structure at the club.
I'll give it.
I think it's still a valid question mark with Montague gone and how Gagliardi's going to replace him and that kind of thing.
Exactly. That's why I'll give it a 7 because I think from an overall, if you're talking about a business model and the nest, and I think you're probably edging towards 9, 10, football structure is a question mark. So I think I've tempered that a little bit with 7.
Budget, I'd imagine it's going to be about an 8 for this season because you're not going to be extravagant spenders, are you? But it's
going to say 8. I'm going to say 8 because I think we do spend a decent amount. I know a lot of people say we're mid-table-ish, but I think if you look at the players we've got, I'd imagine, I don't mean to spend on fees, but wages are fairly decent for the level.
Yeah, if you've bought the likes of Crowley and McGoldrick and Jody Jones, they're not going to be on peanuts, are they? Management, I think we'll have to come back to. Goalkeeper, I mean, would you go to a 10 for that with Alex Bass?
I think relative to the level, yeah, I think I would actually. I think you're not going to get any better than him.
Defence 9.
Yeah, 9's fair as well. Again, I agree with that. I think 8, 9. I think it's again not many better.
Need a right centre half, but that's pretty good. Midfield. I mean, I guess we can include the wing backs in the midfield section because Jody Jones isn't really a defender, is he?
No, I'll probably go 6, just based on what we've spoken about. Where I think it's fine, but I think we're probably 1, maybe 2 players away from taking that up to an 8 or a 9 and going up that level. Those little X factor players that we probably haven't got.
Yeah. We'll say 6 for now, but then pending what happens.
Yeah.
Attack.
Yeah, again, depending on shape. I'll give it maybe a 7 for now, because I was going to say maybe like an 8 or something, but we have lost McGoldrick, and that's a big loss. I think that takes you down at least 1 point. So I'll give it a 7 for now. But I think that depending on shape, if you add Jody and Will Jarvis into that movement from midfield, maybe the midfield comes down a point, but then the attack goes up a point. So I think it all depends on the shape.
That makes a lot of sense. Depth, again, difficult to say before you've signed anyone. So this early in the summer, that's kind of how we have to record these. But depth, I mean, you've got a fair squad in place already. It's just it's quality over quantity needs at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. So it's really difficult because I think we've got depth into the numbers is actually fairly okay. I know we struggled with injuries and stuff last season, but quality depth. I don't know if you picked 11 now, you look to the bench, you go, oh yeah, we've got game changers on that bench. I'm not sure you'd necessarily say that. So maybe I'll go 6. Maybe
okay.
That's 6 maybe
for now, but we can maybe come back to that and see how it changes. Squad stability.
Stability probably is 7, 8, because we haven't lost. Well, we have lost a few big players, obviously, but obviously McGoldrick's the big one. But I think the retained list, other than McGoldrick, who we didn't manage to get a deal with, we released everyone. So it wasn't like we were offering players, and players we wanted to keep, we kept, and other than McGoldrick, who left. So I'd give it 7 because over the last few seasons we've lost big players, but I think the nucleus, the core of the squad, will be largely the same next season.
Yeah, I think 7 or 8 is fair. So growth potential. Who are there lots of players in this squad, do you think, that are going to be better than last season?
It's a great question. I think Will Jarvis is the big one. I think he could definitely grow massively. I think he could become a really, really, really good player, like a top League 2 player. I think Matty Palmer actually, weirdly, could grow back to the levels that he has shown.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but I don't think there's loads of players that have got room to go up a level, really. Jody Jones as well, actually. Again, talking about getting back to levels they've shown. But there's not. We haven't got
for 4 for now, because there's not that many really young players that you think, oh yeah, they're going to shoot up in their development.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, that's the big thing. We haven't got a load of young potential players. So yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, we'll go with 4 for now. Team spirit. This is the intangibles, if you like. Teamwork, commitment, leadership, that kind of thing. I mean, you've got Matty Platt and Jacob Badeau and Matty Palmer, some players who could be quite influential in that regard.
Yeah, maybe go 5 or a 6, just because I think that is perhaps what we lack as a club has been a little bit of. I know he's not necessarily saying nastiness in terms of the team spirit, but that aggression, that
little bit of drive. I suppose what I would say maybe in those. Although statistically you were quite a creative side, there's also an argument that in big games where you're looking for somebody to grab the team by the scruff of the neck and drive it forward, you maybe don't necessarily have that.
Yeah, based on that, actually, I might even go 4 or 5, just because last season against the top teams, we didn't get many points at all. And even if you look at the playoffs, when we were behind, especially the second leg, as soon as he scored that early goal, you kind of knew that was game over. And I think if you have great drive and team spirit, maybe you think we could get something out of this game late, and we don't necessarily have that at all, really. So yeah, maybe a 4, actually. It's
okay,
really
let's go for a 4.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Fitness, what would you say for fitness?
Low, because we had a lot of injury problems. I know it's not the same as injury and fitness, but I think that we struggled. We weren't the most robust squad last season, and when players did come back, I don't think they were near the level that they probably needed to be, and we saw players get dropped in because we had to drop them in. So again,
Yeah.
probably a 4 in terms of fitness because,
Okay.
yeah, I think we were quite brittle last season.
All right, that makes sense. And then quality, I would say in terms of individual, I think right now I'd probably say a 7, but in terms of the recruitment, I'd expect that to go up to an 8 or 9, depending on who you bring in.
I'd agree with that. If we'd have kept McGoldrick, I think it would have been 8 or a 9. But I think
Yeah.
losing McGoldrick on top of Abbott, and then obviously
Possibly,
yeah. So I think 7 is fair because I think we haven't got, especially if you had a 10, like we haven't really got that really creative player outside of Jody Jones potentially, obviously, who last season wasn't his best. So if we get the Jody Jones the season before, maybe we are an 8. So I guess 7 is fair.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, brilliant. So expectations for next season, because I think in the fan base, when you're Notts County in League Two, the expectation is always kind of going to be promotion, isn't it?
Yeah. It's tough to say, but I think it has to be because in terms of how we viewed this season, which was largely through the lens of disappointment, and I know that was obviously due to circumstances like the fact that promotion was there for the taking and we didn't take it. But if you finish 6th and you say that's not good enough, then it has to be higher than 6th, and it has to be. I know that there are factors. The way we ended the season was poor, etc. But I know that those factors are important. But I think it has to be promotion, like you say. That has to be the aim this season. And expectation, that's a difference, I noted, to an aim. But I think it has to be promotion that we're going to have to go for, I think.
Biggest reason to believe in Notts County next season?
I would say the fact that we're as the model. I guess the model is a bit of a rubbish term to throw around, but the way in which we operate, the fact that we've made consistent progress, and whether last season was enough progress or not, that is open to debate. But the trajectory has been an upward one, especially in terms of league position year on year. And I think that the way in which we operate will allow us to make the necessary adjustments once again to maybe push on another level. I think that's probably the biggest reason to be optimistic.
Biggest reason for doubt?
The loss of key players, and maybe using the biggest reason to believe against us in terms of, because we do things try and do things differently. Sometimes perhaps we lose sight of some of the obvious, like you mentioned, the intangibles. Sometimes we lose sight of those sort of things. And
that makes sense.
Losing in McGoldrick, I think it goes beyond what he gives on the pitch, which I think was actually our best attacking performer anyway. But you lost.
So it can be a strength and it can be a weakness, and it's about making sure that, as well as having that kind of data side of clever finding players, you also got some of those intangibles in place.
Exactly that, and that extends to the appointment. The appointment's got to be right, and they got it spot on with Luke Williams.
Do you know what, Tom? Just on that, I think somebody who can have a good relationship with the fan base definitely makes a difference. And I know 90% of that is results, of course. But I also think somebody that can. I think when you're a bigger club, what managers say and how they relate to the media and the fans, it gets analysed a lot more. Whereas if you're a smaller club, I think there's managers who can be very effective at smaller clubs just by being a very good technical coach, and the other stuff doesn't get noticed as much. Whereas I think at a bigger club where it gets magnified, I think you need someone who's ready for that side of the job.
100%. I think that's a great point, and I think that's what actually is probably overlooked with Luke Williams a little bit, as much as because his football was so good. Actually, the way he handled the media, the way he handled the fans, the way he spoke, he got it straight away. And I think that side of his game is so polished, and I think that's probably what is needed from the next appointment. It's a little bit of charisma and someone that can get the fan base on side. And I think we're in a position where the fan base are ready to be on side with a manager, and he needs just a manager who's going to grab that and really connect with the fan base. That's the key bit.
Let's hope you can find that. In terms of I'm not going to ask you for a prediction because it's way too early in the summer for anything like that. But just give me a number between 1 and 10 for your level of optimism for next season right today.
I think today I'm actually at an 8.
Okay,
Weirdly, I
good.
think when the McGoldrick news came out, I was gutted and probably like a 2 or a 3. But I weirdly think, and I mentioned it a few times. I know the fans are itching to get news, and I weirdly think that the kind of silence has been kind of good, and it's kind of, for me personally, anyway, it's allowed me to sort of recover from the season, and where last season's wanted to end. Really, I think it was like we kind of knew we weren't going to go up when we were in the playoffs again, especially when we got Wimbledon. It was kind of like, let's get these games out of the way. There wasn't that much excitement, weirdly. Whereas I think going into the new season, there could be a lot of excitement, and obviously that comes from we've signed players already, and it's like this is exciting, and it's the typical summer excitement. But I do think that as a club we get more right than we get wrong, and I think that gives cause for optimism. So yeah, I'll give it an 8. Just how I feel today.
Nice. Yeah. Well, again, hopefully we're kind of putting faith in the club to make the right decisions and the right moves between over the next couple of months. So we'll have to wait and see. Tom, been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us. You got plans for the Knots to Talk About podcast for next season? Anything you'd like to plug?
We'll have to see. Obviously, with I think that definitely there was a bit of burnout last season in terms of Knots. So I'm hoping that there'll definitely be more Knots content from myself this season. I think there's definitely a little bit of burnout, I think, and that is probably, like you said, about the out of 10 and optimism. I feel a little bit refreshed and ready to go for this season.
Great stuff. Well, we wish you well.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure, Tom. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please do. You can help us out massively by getting subscribed to EFL Debate on YouTube and on Spotify. And I'll see you again for another summer deep dive very soon.